It's great to have Lindsay back with us, isn't it? Okay. I'm going to rearrange things a little bit here. I've been using my notes a lot because there's so many great notes that I've pulled out of the text that we've been learning forgiveness from these past several weeks. But I've been going a little long, I've discovered, in going back and taking a look at my videos. So maybe if I take my notes away from myself, I won't talk so much. We can hope, right? So today we are continuing the series that we have been doing on forgiveness. Forgiveness was one of the things that was identified when our church went through a process called Healing Our Past and Creating Our Future with one of the regional representatives, Reverend Beth Head, back before I left to go overseas. So I wanted to get us right into doing some work on forgiveness when I came back. And I found this particular text that we've been using, the Book of Forgiving by Desmond Tutu and his daughter Umfo. And it's really brilliant. And it hits me very emotionally as well. It's not just a smart book. It's a book that gives you the feels, you know. So if you've not yet delved into it, I really cannot more strongly recommend a book to you than that particular one. I think we still have some in the bookstore, and of course you can always get it in digital format or buy it online. But it's really, really excellent stuff. And we are also talking about it on Wednesday nights in our deep dives at 6:30. So if you get a chance and you want to ask questions about it or dig deeper into it, come on Wednesday night. We do a potluck and we have a lot of fun. So Barry, I know I didn't ask you to do this, but I think you probably still have the slide that has the revenge and forgiveness cycles on them. So if you can bring that up, go ahead, because I want to get people. Oops, we don't. Okay. So for those of you that weren't here in the last couple of weeks, essentially what we have the choice to do when we begin this process is there's going to be an incident that happens. There's going to be some kind of hurt, harm, or loss that happens to us. And when that happens, we suffer pain. Once we're in pain, we are then presented with a choice, and we have to make a decision. Am I going to go into that cycle of revenge where, you know, I decide that other person who's hurting me isn't really, they don't share humanity with me. We're not the same. We're different. And they deserve to be hurt back. And so I take some kind of action that then creates some sort of hurt, harm, and loss in them. And we go round and around and around in this cycle of revenge, which we have seen around the world in a lot of different places, right? It's not working. It never has worked. And it shocks me that we as a species have not learned that yet. But that doesn't mean that we can't. Because we have this other choice that we can make. In that moment when we feel pain, we have the ability to choose to do something different. And the first thing we do is we choose to walk the path of forgiveness rather than going into the revenge cycle. So last week we talked about the first two big steps in the fourfold path of forgiveness. And those are telling our story and naming our hurts. So those are absolutely vital. And this is work that came out of the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but they have also reproduced this in other places around the world. And this methodology works so well, it saved South Africa from descending into chaos and revenge and genocide. And it has been used similarly in other places around the world. So it's not just something somebody came up with to sell some self-help books. This is a known working methodology. So as difficult as it may be sometimes, when we are harmed, when we have a resentment, when we have an unforgiveness and the need to forgive, we must begin by telling our story, as painful as it may be. And sometimes it's extremely painful. And then we have to name those hurts, the actual hurts that happened to us. Because what happened in the story and our own emotional reactions, our own inner responses to it are not necessarily the same things. Amen? You know, how I was hurt and then what I felt about it. Two different things, right? We have to get both of those out of us before we can get to this point that we're at right now, which is forgiving, right? We need to get to this point where we are ready to start forgiving. So when we take a look at it, we have to finally give ourselves the opportunity to step out of being a victim. And as Desmond and Umfo write, this is the point at which we can decide, do we want to be a victim or do we want to be a hero? A victim is someone whose outcomes, whose emotions, whose thoughts are controlled by someone else. A hero is someone who has decided to take their destiny into their own hands and to do those things that they need to do to get right. We will never be able to undo the past, but we can change how we think about it. And if we can change how we think about it, we can change how we feel about it. Emotions are the mind's effect on the body. And if we can change our minds well enough, we can change the way that we feel about those things. We can go from being a victim into being a hero. And the thing about it is we have to be able to get to a place where we're ready to do real forgiveness. Okay, so it's not like when, we were kids and, maybe one of our siblings hit us or did something mean to us. And then our mom said, hey, you say you're sorry. And they said they were sorry to us just like that. And then she says, okay, now you have to forgive them. We haven't even had a chance to say what happened to us. We haven't even had a chance to say why it actually hurt us. I mean, obviously, if somebody hit me in the arm, my arm hurts, but you know what else hurts? I hurt on the inside. I hurt on the inside that, that my sister, who I love and trust, hits me, right? That's the real hurt, right? If I don't get a chance to say that, then if I say, okay, I forgive you, did I mean it? Yeah, probably not so much. And we try to do the same thing to ourselves. We try to do in Unity a lot, we get rightly accused of something we call spiritual bypass, right? I am so evolved that, I can just forgive people for doing something bad to me. No, right? You may be spiritually evolved, but if somebody harms you, you need to get that out of you. It's not like it didn't happen. It happened, right? You need to be able to say, they did this and such, and I felt this way about it. When we deny our feelings, when we stuff those into our subconscious, what happens? It stays in there for a while, and then it comes out sideways. Exactly, right? It stays in there, and then it comes out when we're not expecting it. You ever find yourself, kind of blowing up at somebody you're close to, but you were really angry at, something that happened at work or somebody that cut you off in traffic or something that happened at the grocery store or just any place else, and you take it out on somebody else because it was stuck in there and then it came out sideways, right? That's the same thing that can happen to us if we don't do that upfront work and actually get ready to do the real forgiveness. Right? We have to really be able to look inside and say, okay, I'm ready to roll here. Let me go and actually forgive this person. And sometimes what it takes for us to actually forgive someone may surprise us. The Tutus tell the story of a guy named Ben. And his story is somewhat similar to my own. Ben grew up in a very violent household. It was actually a lot worse than my story. How many of you seen Good Will Hunting, the movie? All right. Will's family, the way he describes it, with his father offering him the choice of a belt or a wrench that he's going to get beat with. That was the kind of family that Ben grew up in. He had a bunch of brothers and a sister, and they lived in terror every day. They were not just beaten, they were tortured and humiliated by their father pretty much every day of their lives. And he describes one particular incident with his younger brother. His brother was maybe 4 or 5 years old and was playing with some blocks. And for some reason, those blocks infuriated his father. And his father picked his brother up by the hair and was shaking him. And Ben described the simultaneous fear of, being afraid for his brother, afraid that his father was going to rip his scalp off, and being ashamed of being glad it wasn't him. Right? So he and his brothers grow up and become angry, violent guys. And he also, as many of us who grow up in situations like that did, he became convinced of his own lack of self-worth. And like a lot of us, he turned to drugs and alcohol for a while. And he was drinking and drugging for about a decade, he said. And he finally gave that up, but he was still angry because he had not yet forgiven his father. And he said that in his path, a lot of people kept prompting him to let go of his anger, to forgive his father. And he was having a tough time doing that because he found that anger that was a core thread that ran through his life and through his psyche, it was extremely difficult to let go of. And it was so difficult to let go of that when he became a father, he recognized that it was becoming part of his relationship with his daughter. And that really scared him. So he finally decided, I've just got to do this. I've got to let go of this. I've got to go make peace with my dad. So he gets on his motorcycle one day and he heads over to his dad's. And his dad comes out and starts talking with him. And starts talking about his motorcycle because they both love motorcycles. And he's looking at this guy who is now much older, kind of wrinkled, a little feeble. He hadn't taken really good care of himself through the years. Got long gray hair. He's playing around with this greasy motorcycle, and he realized he's just a guy. He's just a guy. And he was able to forgive him. When we recognize our shared humanity, that is one of the key elements of being able to actually forgive. When Ben recognized his dad was just another dude just like him, who liked motorcycles, and who had some issues. Who knows where they came from? He didn't tell his dad that he was forgiving him. He didn't ask him to do anything in return. He was simply able to recognize their shared humanity, their shared family, and just let go of it. An interesting thing happened. Some years later, he was very disappointed when his father said something that hurt him. And it was because he had really forgiven his father, and somehow in his mind that had made his father different. And that is a common trap in the cycle of forgiveness. We forgive people, and we think it's changed them. But the truth is, just as we don't forgive people for their sake, we do it for our sake. Our forgiving them doesn't change them, it changes us. And that's why we do it. Right? So the real keys there are to remember that we are all one. We are part of the same human family. We're part of the same God energy. At the beginning of this work, I shared a couple of simple ideas that Bishop Tutu put forth in the book. And, they are that there's nothing that's unforgivable and no one who is undeserving of forgiveness. When we recognize that we are all one, that we're all part of the same human family, those very difficult truths become a little easier to swallow, don't they? Because the thing is, on any given day, while we like to think that we might not be capable of some of the hurts, some of the harms people have inflicted on us, on any given day, we too are capable of inflicting harm on other human beings. And it doesn't really matter how far we all are along the path to enlightenment. You know I have hurt people's feelings even since I've become a Unity minister, since I came here. And certainly didn't do that intentionally. But hurt people hurt people. You know, and there for a couple of years I was operating as a very hurt person. It happens. You know, what we have to hope for is that people will recognize that no matter who we are, you know, even if we're the minister, we're human. It's like the song, right? We're only human. And we all make mistakes, and we all deserve forgiveness, but that means that we all have to be willing to give some forgiveness. So, how we can know that we have forgiven is pretty simple. We know that we've forgiven when our story changes. Right? That story that we told up front, the what happened to me, when we told our story and we told our story and we told our story about being hurt, right? And then we said what the pain was. We named our hurt, right? Once we actually do the forgiveness and we tell the story again, it becomes a story about our overcoming. And I love the way that Bishop Tutu put it, it's no longer about a story of what embittered us, but what ennobled us. Now, I know this is difficult for some of the pains that some of us have suffered. There are some things that have happened to us as human beings that it seems like there's no way that could ever be considered ennobling. The simple fact that we survive those things and that we do not fall into darkness is in itself ennobling. The simple fact that we can choose to get up another day and maybe do something that helps someone else from having to suffer the same way that we did. There's a piece in this we also have to look at that's very difficult, and that is, you know, what is our part in it? And granted, sometimes there's, you know, like nothing that we did to deserve what happened. If, you know, someone's out on the road, they get hit by a drunk driver, that wasn't their fault, you know. And certainly when a child is harmed, even when we take a look and say, well, you know, it's society set things up that way, that kid didn't have any choices. You know, you think of all the kids who were abused by priests, for example. No matter what happens, whether the kid told people or didn't, you know, whether they acted out or didn't, it's not their fault. But what they can do when they're an adult is that they can make some choices. And they may actually be able to help someone else. They may be able to change that environment. They may be able to become part of the reparation process and the process to prevent those things from ever happening again. They can be part of the change. And, you know, many of us can look and see that, yes, maybe I had a little something to do. You know, when my mom said that thing to me that really hurt my feelings, well, maybe what she was saying to me actually had some truth in it because of the way I was behaving at that moment. Right? Those things are very possible. But being able to turn the story around, in 12-step recovery, it becomes very obvious. We tell our stories. And very often, early in people's recovery, what their story is becomes something we call a drunkalogue, where they tell about all the things they did wrong up until the time they got sober. What happens when someone has been healed for a while, when they've been sober for a while, is instead of focusing on all the stuff that they did wrong, their story becomes about how their life has changed and the tools that they've learned and the good that has happened to them. And this is very similar to what happens in the process of forgiving. At that tipping point, when we've actually granted forgiveness, we start telling the story of a hero instead of the story of a victim. Make sense? So once we have done the forgiveness work, the actual process is not over. Even though we have actually forgiven someone, we then have to make another decision. And this decision is about either releasing or renewing the relationship. And I want to make this very clear. Forgiving does not mean renewing the relationship. And for many people, those things have become synonymous. It's like, well, obviously you haven't forgiven your sister because you're still not talking to her. Right? Well, no, I forgave her. I'm just done. I wish her well. I love her bunches, but I don't need that drama in my life. You know what? That's a valid thing to say. The key things about releasing and renewing relationships. Number one, it's always better, if possible, to renew a relationship if you can. Unless it involves placing yourself in a position of danger. If it's not safe, it's not a choice. Okay? But making the choice to walk away from someone you've been in relationship with forever, they're going to take a piece of you with them. And that is not a choice that needs to be made lightly or in the heat of the moment. That choice needs to be made stone cold sober and with a clear heart. And it can only be made if you can also honestly say to yourself, look inside there and say, and I don't wish them any harm whatsoever. At that point, you can say, yes, I have forgiven them and I've released the relationship and it's done. Because if you're still kind of wishing them a little bit of harm, the relationship is not over with. You still got a little something going on in there, don't you? Right? I have been there. I've still got some people I got to work on. It just is what it is. I can fog a mirror. I have forgiveness work to do. But the real key in releasing is making sure that it is clean, right? That there's no animosity, that you really do not wish them harm, right? And at that point, you can let them go. Now, in renewing a relationship, one of the things that it's important for you to understand and for that other person to understand is that you're never going to go back to the way things were before. Renewing has the word new in it, doesn't it? So when we renew that relationship, what we're actually doing is building something else. And we're building it on a foundation of forgiveness and of recognition of what has happened before. Now, a key piece of this, of being able to renew the relationship with someone, is that you get to ask for what you need. Okay? And this is different from the act of forgiving. All right? In forgiving, we don't ask that other person to give us something so that we can forgive them, because that puts the power in whose hands? In theirs, right? And because if they don't, say they were sorry, if they don't, give me back my spoon, if they don't whatever, then I'm still stuck with this unforgiveness. We're not having that, right? I'm going to forgive them no matter what. But if they want to be in further relationship with us, then we absolutely have the right to ask for whatever we need. And the most common thing is simply to know why. Why did you call me that name? Why did you, go do that thing with that other person you shouldn't have done? Why did you do whatever it was? I have to know why. I have to have some closure. Another interesting story, there was a couple, and Dan and Linda. Their daughters were killed by a drunk driver. And they never met her because she pled guilty. And their intention was, when they were informed that she was being released on parole, was to meet her so that they could get some closure, and then they were just going to let it all go. So they were in touch with the parole officer, because the parole officer had contacted them to let them know she was getting out. And when they put this request forward, the parole officer said, well, that's actually, part of the conditions of her parole was not to contact you guys, but we can make this happen. So they set up a meeting between the three of them, and Dan, in writing down what had happened, said that when they walked into the room, the first thing that he and Linda did was they hugged her, and he started crying, and he couldn't let go of her, and he couldn't stop crying. They sat down to talk, and the gal, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but she had gone through the steps while she was incarcerated. And she told them that as part of her 9th step, which is where we make amends to people, she was going to be doing a living amends. And when they asked her what that meant, she said that she would be going around to prisons and schools and telling her story and trying to keep other people from going through what they had gone through, and their daughters who had died. And so as it turned out, she and Linda started going around and speaking together, and they actually renewed the relationship. But Dan and Linda had asked for what they needed to be final. And you can too. If that other person doesn't want to give it, then you may have a very clear path ahead of you and know exactly what you need to do. If they don't, then you still have the choice. It's still your decision. But again, this is where the toggle shifts from you being the victim to you being the hero. You're now in the driver's seat. You get to ask for what you need, and you get to decide, even once you get that thing you ask for, whether you want to release the relationship or renew the relationship. It is entirely up to you. This is such powerful work. From being a victim who has a load of resentment to carry around for the rest of their life, to being able to shift it to forgive someone honestly and permanently. And you know what? The thing about this process is it's not always, exactly perfect. The steps don't always go perfectly in that order. And you may get to the point where you have told your story, you have named your hurts, you have done the forgiveness, but you're just not ready to decide whether you want to, release or renew the relationship. That's okay, because this work is work of the heart. Even though we have to use our minds to get us through it, it's still our hearts that are kind of taking the lead in this process, and it's okay if it takes them a while. And it's okay if there's some time where we don't know. But we just keep doing the work, and we keep making the decisions that we need to make to take care of ourselves. And eventually, we can stop thinking of ourselves as victims, and we can be heroes. Please join me in prayer. Sweet Spirit, for this time together, for this opportunity to remember that we are, in fact, all one. All the people who've hurt us, all the people we've hurt. That forgiveness is possible in all things, and that we can be heroes for these gifts and for this joyful life that is possible beyond anything. We say thank you. Thank you, God. So it is.